take a moment to thank everybody for showing up and showing interest in this. I am the director of the Schusterman Library at OU-Tulsa, where everything is named after Schusterman. I'm right next door to the Schusterman Learning Center and across the way from Schusterman Clinic. And I have been a medical librarian since 1993 and actually got my start at the Bird Health Sciences Library there at OU Health Sciences in Oklahoma City. But I have been a collector and lover of comic books since long before that. I've been collecting comics since I was 6 years old. And I'm not telling you my actual age, but you can probably gather that it's been a little while. I am this year teaching a class for the library science program out of Norman on comics and graphic novels. And it's directed at future librarians. And it's started me thinking about different ways that I can use and bring comics to the academic sphere. And so I was really excited to get approached to give this talk because it gives me a chance to talk about a very specific area of comics called graphic medicine. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on here today. I'm going to start us out with just a little bit of a definition. Ian Williams is both a comics artist and a physician, and we're going to be talking about him a little bit further on too. He's the editor of graphicmedicine.com, or it's actually, I got that wrong, that's .org. It's already screwed up. Knock off 20 points. I don't know. I'm now worth 130. I don't know what happened there. But he wrote, I've coined the title graphic medicine for this site as a handy term to denote the role that comics can play in the study and delivery of healthcare. That's a pretty broad definition. And a lot of people might hear that and go, wait a minute, comics that can play a role in the study and delivery of healthcare. Comics, we're talking, wait a minute, we're talking about this, right? We're talking, Superman, and we're talking Archie, and we're talking about Woody Woodpecker and whatever else. This is what you mean when you say comics. And I want to maybe broaden, I think, your definition or our definition a little bit of comics to start out with. Comics is more than just the cute little 4-color pamphlets that star all of our favorite superheroes and cartoon characters. Comics is an art form. It is juxtaposing pictures, images against text in a very specific way and using sequential images on a page to produce an aesthetic or an informative response in a viewer. So what you see here is Scott Mccloud, who in 1991 wrote the book Understanding Comics. And it is a comic book about comics. It's about the entire art form and kind of a critique of it and an exploratory study to understand what comics is. And so we're going to be looking at some of his work real quick here. But so juxtaposed pictorial and images in a deliberate sequence intended to convey information or an aesthetic response. He starts getting you there with the concept of icon or iconography, where an image can be used to substitute for meaning. Some of you might be familiar with the painting from Magritte. I can't pronounce it in French, but it's "This is not a pipe," where it's an image of a pipe, and underneath it says in French, "This is not a pipe." And that's true. An image on the page is meant to be a representation. Representation is power. Representation is a very powerful way of getting an idea across. And so as an example here, we have "This is not music" with a musical score. We have "This is not a country" with an American flag. These are not people with the icons meant to represent male and female for restrooms and whatnot. Ideas can be transposed into icon, and icon can be used in ways that facilitate discussion and understanding and ideas, okay? That's about all I want to say about icon for right. There's a very specific icon that gets used in comics called the cartoon. The example given here, Scott Mccloud is taking a fairly generic looking, movie star style photo and stripping away bits and pieces of that until he ends up with simply a circle with two dots and a line. And yet that circle with two dots and a line is almost universally accepted as face. It means that you have a person there. You want to add a little bit of detail to that, give them hair, eyebrows, ears, and so forth, perfectly welcome to do that. But we can strip down meaning in comics to a point where a very simple icon can convey an awful lot of meaning. Additionally, it has universality to it. We're in a period now where we want to embrace the diversity of the workforce that's available to us. That final image of a circle with two dots and a line is not just my face and your face, that's everybody's face. And there's a universality to cartooning that isn't generally available in other art forms and is something that can be used, especially when we start talking about medicine and healthcare, which we're going to get to in a sec. The last comment I wanted to make here about what comics are. It is a blending of text and image. Mccloud makes a point that image pictures are received information. There's practically no translation that goes on in the human brain. You see it, you understand it almost immediately because it is image. Where writing is perceived information. At some point or another, the letters, the words on the page have to be translated in your head and given meaning through context, through how the sentence is structured, through what words are chosen. By combining these two elements, we kind of get a best of both worlds effect. You can actually use text and image simultaneously to convey meaning to, if you will, all the brain, that you can get things in there that you just want them to understand through reception, or things that are more elaborate that you want context and meaning applied, and so there's perception taking place. So this is a lot, I know, but I wanted you to have an understanding and appreciation that I've started to grow and have an appreciation as to what comics have to offer as an art form when you take away things like, oh, is it Superman, is it Spider-Man, and so forth. What does it mean for graphic medicine? Graphic medicine, we tend to think of the four major elements that you can accomplish with graphic medicine. And these, again, are from Ian Williams. They're not mine. Reflecting or changing cultural perceptions of medicine, getting people to think about medicine maybe differently than they thought about it before. Think about health and healthcare differently than they thought about it before. Relating the patient or carer or provider experience. What is life like in someone else's shoes? Again, we're in a time when it is very important for us to understand and empathize with others, and comics give us an interesting way of perhaps achieving that. Enabling discussion of difficult concepts, difficult subjects. Graphic medicine has an ability to distill things down, as we were talking about that universality, and help everyone perhaps better understand a challenging health issue. And I'm going to have a lot of examples of that. And then helping. Those people, especially who are dealing with chronic illness, have dealt with illness for a long period of time, have difficulty sometimes finding others that they trust to understand their individual health condition. I cannot remember where I found this statistic, but it was something on the order of 70% of people who are dealing with a chronic health condition find the most trustworthy source of additional information on their condition to be other people who have survived it, to be other cancer survivors, to be other heart condition survivors, and so on and so forth. Graphic medicine has the ability to tell stories from those people's points of view from the perspective of memoir. So with all of that said, I want to give you some examples. So these are some of the graphic medicine books that we have here in the library, and a few others I want to talk about. We'll show you some examples here. I wanted to start out with one that's very personal to me, Pedro and Me, Friendship, Loss, and What I Learned by Judd Winnick. I don't know how many of you might remember MTV's The Real World San Francisco. This would have been about 92, 93, when Pedro Zamora was a cast member. Pedro was a very young man. I think he was age 20 at the time, and had been diagnosed HIV positive when he was only 17 years old. Cuban American immigrant. He was dealing with uh, AIDS in a time when America was not doing well dealing with AIDS. And he was one of the first very public faces of AIDS on television. And Judd Winnick was also one of his castmates on MTV The Real World. He was a cartoonist, and the two of them became friends during their time there in the house. And Judd, after Pedro passed away, wanted to continue telling his story. And so he wrote and drew Pedro and me and told all of Pedro's history and the story of how he became HIV positive, to how he became an AIDS activist and educator, and how he was able to use MTV and the real world to further his message, and then ultimately how he passed and what his legacy was. And so it's a very compelling story. It's a very personal story, but it's one that for a time when people were still struggling with the understanding of HIV and AIDS was a very important one. My Degeneration by Peter Dunlap, and I think it's Scholl. I've been having problems with some of the name pronunciations. I apologize. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's at age 43. He was a staff cartoonist for an Anchorage newspaper for years. And this story is his own story, his memoir about his dealings with doctors, his living with the disease, how it affected his life, his relationships, and all of his expectations for the future. One of the pages that I give here is a reprise of his diagnosis many years after his initial diagnosis, where the doctor is telling him he has maybe 10 to 15 good years left before the degeneration fully takes him. And he wants to know that rather than to have it soft sold to him. And this is a very real and a very personal narrative for him, but he tells it with a lot of good humor and a lot of hope. And it makes for a really interesting story. Graphic medicine can be a great way for health providers, perhaps, to see things from their patients' point of view, as well as seeing the patients and how they are affected by chronic illness and how they come to trust and appreciate the stories of others who live with that condition. This one's a little bit different. There are, in fact, in the graphic medicine collection, there's several books from doctors and nurses about their experiences. Ian Williams, who founded graphicmedicine.org, also wrote and drew The Bad Doctor, which you see here. It has the feel of a memoir, but it actually is a novel. It's meant as a work of fiction about a general practitioner in England who struggles with obsessive compulsive disorder, and it affects his daily interactions with friends and family, but it's also helped him to become a more empathetic doctor. It actually reminded me a lot of All Creatures Great and Small, which was one of my favorite books growing up. It has a significantly darker tone as the lead character tends to his patients, but he also enjoys cycling through the countryside. He's dealing with a lot of anxiety, and he has crippling issues trying to form relationships with other people. But it does help for those of us who are reading it, to understand that healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, and everyone else are just people like we are, and that they're just as human as the rest of us and often have their own struggles that they're working through. This one's very recent, was published in February, the COVID Chronicles. It is thick. I've actually got it here. Massive book. I want to say it was something 270 some odd pages. It's an anthology work of over 60 different stories and snippets, all about our shared experiences dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. It was edited for publication back in October, so it doesn't really talk about the vaccine and where we are now with it, but as a moment in time, capturing the pandemic from its beginnings in early 2020 to about October. This is a really interesting work. I'll show you a few pages from it. Um, the stories themselves are all very, very good, but they cover a lot of different territory. The one that you're seeing on the far right there is a COVID survivor, and this is, I think, like day 7 or so of him being at home, hasn't showered in days, has been dealing with constant diarrhea, all of the things, told from a somewhat, humorous, but, this is a terrible thing that he had to come through. On the far left, an example of someone who's doing the living from home, working from home, but trying to keep it in context. So she starts out saying, the good, the bad, the ugly. The good is you get to work from the comfort of your own home. The bad, working in pajama pants is still working. And the ugly, jobs and housing are hard to find. And she knows that she's fortunate to be able to have what she has. These are good stories to have captured for this time period. The one in the middle, of course, is a physician letting go of a patient who is his wife. These are tragic and sometimes thoughtful and sometimes heartwarming, and it's a collection of stories that runs the gamut. Just as all of us have been on an emotional roller coaster over this past year, so does this book kind of come across. The last major example I want to give, I'm going to show you a few other books, but I wanted to share one that this one surprised me and goes back to Scott Mccloud's definition and how the art and the icon can do things that you can't do in any other form. I honestly believe this book could only be told as a graphic novel. It's called 1,000 Colored Castles by Gareth Brooks. And he uses these pastels that you see here, the very grayed and washed out pastels, to tell a story about a woman named Miriam as she is succumbing to macular degeneration and is beginning to not see well. But in addition to that, has begun to succumb to what's called Charles Bonnet syndrome, which is visual hallucinations that occur as a result of the macular degeneration. In the example that you see here, the art is kind of washed out looking, but she's sitting and speaking with her doctor. And you can tell, the writing is even kind of hard to read. Even when you have the book right in front of you and you've got your glasses on like I do, the writing can still be hard to read. She says she thinks she needed new glasses, but they told me I had macular degeneration. It's like a blur, but you can see around the edges. What she's not telling him is that she's also starting to hallucinate, that his face contorts as she's looking at it. And you can even see in the final 2 panels that his face has started to grow kind of organic plant-like tendrils, and that's a common theme in her visual hallucinations that she experiences. The next page I wanted to share from this is from the same book, is repetition of items. Here she's walking up to her own house and about to turn the doorknob, and suddenly several other door handles start to appear in front of her, and she can't tell which one is real, which one she's supposed to reach for to open her own door. This is a really interesting, I think, compelling way to tell this story that makes it very empathetic for the reader. You experience it because the artwork itself is so challenging and difficult, even for people with reasonably decent eyesight. To come out the other side of this, to know what it must be like for someone like Miriam to go through these stages. I can't say enough about 1,000 Colored Castles. I enjoyed the work immensely, and I thought the artistry behind it was quite riveting. So this is barely scratching the surface of what is out there as graphic medicine. I've mentioned a few times Ian Williams' site, graphicmedicine.org. I wanted to share, I've got a few other books here that are just from the collection here in the library. And some of them are very simple. I may be, am I reversed? I think I'm reversed, aren't I? Anyway, Diabetes and Me. This is just meant to be a guidebook for kids and parents. And it's very straightforward artwork and very simple and easy to understand. And so, you might think graphic medicine, and a lot of the work is in fact designed to be patient education materials. But along with that, it can be used to tell stories that have not been told, at least to my knowledge, anywhere else. Probably nothing. A diary of your not your average 9 months is about a first-time mother who is also diagnosed with cancer during her pregnancy. This is an incredible story and told from her own point of view by Matilda Tristram. Very, very good book. And then finally, one that I struggled with, I didn't want to include visual examples from this because it is a really difficult work to share. 100 Months. This is the story of the artist, John Hinkleton, who was in fact, he was diagnosed, I'm going to get this wrong if I don't read it off of here. Cannot find it here now. He was, oh, no, they don't, multiple sclerosis. That's right, primary progressive multiple sclerosis. He asked for an assisted suicide 100 months out. And this is the book that he wrote and drew, his final work, as he knew that he only had 100 months left to live. Fully painted, a fantasy work about a female character who is fighting monsters of all kinds and trying to find a way through to survival. It ends on a surprisingly hopeful note, but it's an incredibly dark and shocking piece of work to read through. These are just a few examples of what makes up graphic medicine. I wanted to share some of these with you. They are all on display at the library right now. The Schusterman Library, we have put aside an area of the collection that we are calling the Graphic Scholarship Collection. It's made up of graphic medicine as well as other nonfiction works of comics. We've got political science, we've got history, we've got memoir. There's a lot of different ways of telling stories. And I personally believe that the scholarly literature can also benefit from having this type of art applied to it. And so we've started building a collection of graphic scholarship to share with this campus, hopefully to have other workshops and other events that we'll be doing in the near future. That's really about it for me. I wanted to include a little self-portrait there that I've been working on my own art. I've been trying to find a way to get that side of the brain operational. But this is just a few examples, just a few things I wanted to share about graphic medicine. So I think with that, I could probably kill the stop share here. And then, I don't know, Lindsay, did I fill my time? I've lost track of the clock.
No, that's great. Take, whatever time you need. I think this is very, very valuable information and definitely got me thinking, and I'm sure several of us, rest of us on here as well, and taking an interesting approach with it. I have an almost 2-year-old, so you think about, storybooks and pictures and that sort of thing, but I'm also a very visual person. So stuff like this, absolutely, I think makes sense. I would have probably done a lot better in my college history classes if they were all done, with, more pictures and kind of, this graphic sort of way to really bring the story to life. So no, I think this is quite interesting in how it's helping us learn with both visually and then with words and putting it all together for those of us that might be a bit more visual learners.
I think one of the things I try to stress too is that whether a visual learner or text-based or auditory or whatever, I think comics have something to offer just about everybody. And I think people get locked into an idea like the kid at the comic book rack with the Superman and Wonder Woman and whatnot, that comics are just one thing. And I think truly, like most forms of literature and most forms of art that are out there, there is in fact something, a graphic novel for everyone. They might just have to, go poking around a little bit to see if they can find something that's a good fit for them.
Excellent. I know it looks like we had some questions like the COVID comic that you shared. Should most of these that you shared today people be able to find like on Amazon, or are there any that are a little bit harder to
I,
locate?
I think most of them should be available through Amazon. Some of them, like 100 Months, it was published by a small press for a very brief period of time. I don't believe it's currently in print, so it might be that you have to find a collector or someone else to get it from. I could be wrong about that. I know that some of these were a little harder to track down than others, but we did build the collection here with the idea that we wanted the best works that we could find. The overwhelming majority of them, I think, are still available in print.
Excellent. And then also had another question. Are there any graphic novels or stories that cover the subject of mental health, such as bipolar disorder, that you could recommend for teens?
Um, I don't have any that I can think of offhand, but I will say that the graphic medicine website is searchable. And I'm just going to very quickly here, I'm typing in the word bipolar just to see what it comes back with. And it actually, yeah, there are several books that seem to have come right back. Ellen Forney, Rock Steady, Brilliant Advice from My Bipolar Life. That might be worth checking out and seeing if it's any good. Um, I'll also say that, and I didn't talk about the graphic medicine site as much as I probably should have. If you look under reviews, you'll find links to web comics. And if you're, not eager to jump right out and buy a bunch of physical items, you might check out some of the web comics that are out there available. Those are also on here, and the reviews are searchable by keyword.
Excellent. And I think, like I said before, we'll send out a follow-up email to attendees and would love to include a lot of these titles that you've shared today if people want to go back and check those out. And then also where they can search for more graphic novels if they want to look for more on their own.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm happy to share all the slides, and I'll include a link to graphicmedicine.org, and we can help people search it if they need help with it.